So today's lecture is going to be on beginning relationships, and specifically I will be talking about dating. As a reminder, your readings for this week are chapter 5 of your textbook that's posted online where you found the PowerPoint slides and this video. You don't have to read the whole chapter 5. It's only till page 138 for this section. The remainder of the chapter is on cohabitation, and that'll be for our next section when we start talking about cohabitation. So as a reminder, you need to be taking notes on what I'm lecturing. I tried to add a little bit more detail into the PowerPoint slides so it's a little easier for you guys to take notes. But again, some of the things I'm saying are not necessarily going to be written on the PowerPoint slides, so you need to make sure you take a note of those. I'll also try and point out specifically what's important that you should be focusing on. Okay, so as it regards to dating, of course we love to ask our child experts. But Mike, who's 10, thought that on the first date, they just tell each other lies, and that usually gets them interested enough to go out for a second date. So it's always really interesting to see the perspective children have on dating and relationships. So the overview of what I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to look at the historical look at dating and courtship and go over some contemporary dating over the lifespan. Class on Tuesday, I will be talking about dating among GLBTQ youth. So that part is not going to be in this lecture. Also, this may end up being 2 parts if it gets too long, so I just wanted to make you all aware of that. So dating and courtship through history in the U.S. There's somewhat limited knowledge, so what we know about courtship and dating is based on heterosexual upper middle class individuals, and primarily it's from Western culture. So the United States specifically. We don't know, at least our research doesn't tell us a lot about historical dating and courtship patterns, especially in more Eastern traditions. So there are several influences, the first of which is your family. So while young people in America have always been active in selecting a partner as compared to other cultures, parental and kinship and social group influences have become less direct over time. And this is especially true for those outside of the upper class. So again, in the upper class, your family and kinship and social group has actually continued to have a strong influence over dating and courtship patterns. There's also some social trends that have become common themes across time, and these have been things such as having similar backgrounds and values, having similar social standings, having parental approval, and the ability of a man to support a wife and family has also been a pretty common theme over time. So romantic love and practicality have also varied in how they've been incorporated into dating and courtship. So during earlier times, romantic love and expression were not very central to the dating and courtship practices. The overriding concerns were more of a practical nature. So some examples of this might be women who are marrying men who can provide for a family. That would be a economic or more practical concern than, for example, couples who are choosing to get married because they're in love, which tends to be more common now than in the past. So continuing on, I want to talk about some courtship practices. The advent of dating, which occurred around the 1920s, These courtship practices tended to happen prior to that. So courtship socializing was done in supervised locations, and this could be areas like your home, a church, or a community setting, and it was often done on a group basis. Individuals had to get permission from the family to actually have access to one another, and courtship was a more formalized process. Men had to basically state their intentions up front to the parents or father of young women before they could even get time alone with her. So again, this is very different from some of the things how we view dating now, where um, it's less of a formalized process, and although parents do have some control, it's definitely not as restrictive as in the past. So like I mentioned, couples were allowed some time alone. And this could be like talking on the front porch or talking alone in the parlor. And this was a way for them to get to know each other better without the direct supervision from their family. There is also something called colonial bundling, and so this is an important term. Colonial bundling, and this basically a young courting couple could sleep together for the night. Each partner, however, would be fully clothed, and sometimes a board would be placed between them. There weren't supposed to be any sexual intimacies between the two members of a couple. It was really just supposed to be an opportunity to develop further closeness. But such closeness obviously went beyond the intended limits. So there was actually a pretty high premarital conception rate when this sort of courtship practice was occurring. It was about 30%, and this was around the 1770s. So again, 30% premarital conception rate in the 1770s. So we'll usher in the Industrial Revolution, and again, this was about the 1790s through the 1830s. And here we see a change in work and gender roles, and this was especially for women. So women gained increased access to men because they're now working in factory settings. And this is opposed to prior where more agricultural based work used to be more common. And so these factory settings had a lot of workers in a very single centralized location, and this had implications for courtship practices. And there are four important implications that the Industrial Revolution had for courtship. The first of which is that courtship became increasingly romanticized and idealized. So again, this is different than in the past where courtship and dating-ish, concerns were of a more practical nature. Second, there was an increased disclosure and intensity in the emotional arena. So again, there was an increased disclosure and intensity in the emotional arena. The third implication was that courtship became a more formalized process ending in an elaborate wedding. And fourth, women were viewed as the moral guardians against men's unbridled passions. So there we have seen a little bit of continuity with this kind of view of women, where it's a little bit changing now, I guess, but women were seen as supposed to be chaste, and they were the gatekeepers essentially for intimate relationships. So dating as we know it emerged in the 20th century, and this is again the 1900s. So there were no more chaperones during this sort of dating like there was in the past. So visits with a potential partner didn't have to be supervised by parents or other authority figures. And there also wasn't the formal initial commitment like there was in the past either. So, like I mentioned earlier, men who were courting women had to formally state their intent to court and potentially marry this woman. That initial formal commitment was not actually required in the 20th century. Economics were also changing what dating and courtship looked like. So, a man who spent economic resources on socializing with the woman actually gained greater control in the relationship. And this is opposed to how things had been in the past, where courtship rituals typically occurred in a woman's family's parlor. And so this actually gave her and her parents and her family more control over the dating and courtship process. However, in the 20th century, again, when men were able to spend the money on a date, essentially, it afforded them more power in that relationship and courtship dynamic. So, romantic love also continued to gain ascendancy as a basis for marriage. Cars, they actually afforded couples a lot more privacy. So, you actually got some time away from any chaperones or parents or authority figures. Sexuality changed a little bit, so sexual relations were occurring earlier and with more partners. And there was a delayed age at marriage during this century. So that actually afforded individuals a chance to meet more people and potential partners. The 2010 census data indicates the median age of first marriage is 28.2 for men and 26.1 for women. In 2011, the median age of marriage was 28.7 for men and 26.5 for women. So I'll repeat that. This is important. The 2010 census data indicates that the median age of first marriage was 28.2 for men and 26.1 for women. And in 2011, it was 28.7 for men and 26.5 for women, which is quite a bit higher than it had been previously. We also see dating changing a little bit in this century. So dating could be more like hanging out in groups, hooking up, which did not occur during courtship as much in the past. Meeting via the internet, so these dating websites, that you've seen commercials for, probably like eHarmony, Match, things like those. Speed dating. So that basically, in speed dating, you get to meet several partners for a short amount of time, maybe like a minute or 4 minutes or something like that. And if you guys both connect, you like write it down, and at the end, the coordinator of the event will provide matched participants with like contact information. And there's high-end matchmaking services as well. So your text talks about like a website, I think, called Selective Search. But if you've ever seen the TV show Millionaire Matchmaker, this is kind of like that too. Where basically wealthy clients come in and try and get matched up with partners. And there's also international dating in the 20th century as well. And again, this is really was helped through the improving technology, So you can imagine how things like Skype and, cell phones make things international dating or more possible. There's also cohabitation, which is a pretty recent um, dating style. So again, cohabitation is living together in an intimate relationship as if married. And this did not used to happen in the past. And there's also living apart together, abbreviated LAT. And this is a committed couple who does not live in the same home. They can be unmarried. Um, and so this is kind of why we're discussing them in the dating section. But living apart together couples can also be married. So it's been about 15 minutes. I think I'm going to stop and break this into two sections.